Morning. Okay, so I guess I'll get started. Thank you everyone for joining today's Polycon UK webinar. Welcome back. We're extremely excited to have Gianmarco with us today. He'll talk about policymaking, trust, and the demand for public services. And before I hand over to Gianmarco, just our usual reminder, these webinars take place every 2 weeks on Mondays at 3 p.m. UK time. In 2 weeks, we'll have Dana Fuarta with us. And as usual, you can find more information about the coming list of speakers on our website. We also would like to encourage you to follow us on Twitter or subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'll continue the format for the webinar today is as follows. The webinar lasts for 16 minutes. Gianmarco is happy to take questions throughout, but in particular, after 50 minutes, on the last 10 minutes, we'll have a more general Q&A session. After 60 minutes, we'll turn off the recording, and Gianmarco will be around for another 10 to 15 minutes for a more informal discussion of the paper. And yeah, I guess without further ado, I'll hand over to Gianmarco. Thank you again for accepting our invitation, and the screen is yours.
All right, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be considered in this amazing list of speakers, and congratulations for the webinar. It's a fantastic public good. Okay, so the paper I want to present today is relatively new work that we just finished with two former UPF students, Dijana, who is now at Vienna, and Fernando, who is at Universidad de Piura. And the issue that we want to think about in this paper is what determines effective policymaking, right? And effective policymaking requires two very distinct but very complementary issues at the same time, right? On the one hand, you need a state that has enough capacity to produce and distribute public goods and services, and on the other hand, you need citizen demand for these services, right? And in turn, the demand for public services is deeply ingrained in the level of trust citizens have for the government, right? So think for example about 6 months ago, the case of the US with COVID vaccines. In this case, what we see is a state that has amazing capacity, right? They organize the early funding for vaccine research and production. They set up the procurement mechanisms. They set up the distribution channels. And they were among the first to have enough vaccines to cover a large share of the population. And yet take-up rates were extremely low, right? And worryingly low for a relatively long period of time. And this was, according to most of the accounts, due to the low levels of trust citizens had on science, on the government. So there was a deep ideological divide, which ended up affecting the demand for these public services, right? So this is what we want to study in this paper, and in particular, where we want to put our finger on is the fact that the way the policies are implemented can affect citizen trust, which in turn either reinforces or undermines the effectiveness of public policies, right? So if we have a high capacity state and high trust, basically these two things are going to go together and increase the effectiveness of public policies. But the other side of the coin is what is a little bit more worrisome, right? When you have a public good provider that is mediumly effective, as is the case in most developing countries, but low citizen trust. In this case, basically you're going to have demand for public services plummeting, which can lead to inefficient levels of spend. Okay, and so to go a little bit deeper into what we're going to do in this paper, what we're going to be doing is studying the short and long-term consequences of a large-scale family planning campaign where alleged human rights violations took place. Okay, and here you might already be guessing where I'm going. So this campaign was conducted between 1996. Sorry, there's a typo here, and 2000 by the Peruvian government. And during this large-scale family planning campaign, about 300,000 women were sterilized. So basically, the government was providing a big package of free contraceptive methods, and among them sterilization. So more than 300 women were sterilized. After the government fell, this was implemented at the time when an authoritarian government was in power in Peru. We started learning about many reports that some women said that they did not consent to the intervention, or were threatened, bribed, misguided, etc., right? And this information just came out to the public discourse after the regime fell in 2001. So what we are going to do in this paper is compare the demand for public services, and in particular of public health services, between women who live in places where alleged human rights violations happened as part of this campaign, before and after the disclosure of the information. Okay, so just to be 200% clear, here I'm not going to be measuring the direct effect of the policy, but rather the effect of the disclosure of the potential events that violated human rights, that reveal kind of medical mispractices as part of the execution of this campaign on different health outcomes, demand for public services, and trust in institutions. All right, so just to give you a glimpse of where we're going to be going, what we find in the paper is that women who live in localities with higher incidence of reported cases after the disclosure of information are, number one, less likely to use contraceptive methods. Two, they have lower usage of prenatal and delivery services. And three, their children have worse health outcomes along a variety of dimensions that I'm going to show. Okay, what we see is that women are less likely to take their kids to public health services when they are sick. To some extent, some women reallocate to going to private health services, but the sheer magnitude of the effects is completely different, and the change in the composition of users from public to private services do not add up, right? So basically, there's way less people who are using health services overall in the areas that were affected, were alleged victims of the campaign, of the human rights violations were. All right, this effect is not caused by the direct effect of the policy, but rather of the information. And I'm going to show you a bunch of robustness checks along that direction. And importantly, we observe that these effects are not just a quick drop and then back to business as usual, but rather the effects survive even 17 years after the campaign information was revealed, right? Which tells us something very deep about how these types of quote unquote errors in execution of policies affect the demand for public services. Basically, what we find is that that there is a drop in trust for government institutions, right? Not only to the government, but the institutions. And this is why the effect lasts for so long, right? So the remaining question here is, why do we see these effects happen? So we run a bunch of regressions to try to get to try to understand what's underlying these effects. And what we find is that the effects are entirely driven by municipalities that at baseline supported the government strongly, right? So the story that we're going to tell here is one in which I like the government a lot. Suddenly, I learned that the government really messed up. I become disappointed and lose trust in institutions and stop using government services, right? So to confirm this, we show that in these municipalities, after the revelation of the alleged human rights violations, we see a drop in the support of the government, and as I told you, the effects here on both health outcomes and the usage of public health services is much larger. Okay, so let me quickly go over the literature that we think we contribute to here. There are two main strands of the literature to which we speak to. First one is the one that talks about state capacity and the legitimacy of policymaking and trust in the government. And what we're going to, a bunch of people have contributed to this literature, of course, both in terms of what determines a state that has high state capacity and what types of events are going to help to undermine trust in the government. So what we're going to contribute here is to show that failures in policy making can undermine trust due to the specific way the policies are implemented. The second strand of the literature that we're going to talk to is the one talking about the demand for public health in developing countries, right? So there's a bunch of high-level reviews that we cite here, but there's a specific recent set of papers to which Andrea has a really cool paper that is cited over here that talks about the role of trust in enhancing the demand for public health services. I'm going to come back to the three papers that I cite here, because they're going to be the ones that inspire us to try to think about what are the potential mechanisms and what mechanisms should we be thinking about as mediating our effects. Okay, so let me just go back to this literature a little bit later. Okay, so before I give you a little bit of the background, let me pause for a second to see if there are any questions either in the chat or something that is not just from the framing.
Oh, sorry, there is a question in. Yeah, go ahead. Christine?
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, thank you, Gianmarco. I was just wondering, I presume you're going to say something about why you think that the distrust is going to be stronger locally. Is it because you think that the news reports are going to be more salient locally, or you think that there were enough women affected that they are likely to know someone that they talk to?
We cannot pin down that. That's a fantastic question. Thank you, Christine. We cannot pin down entirely the effects. So let me be a little bit speculative here. This is something that we're working on right now. So first, we do not find that the effects are stronger in places where TV or radio signal is stronger, right? So the main effect is not going through media. My sense is that there is a combination of one of the things that you said, right? That there are places where there is enough women who were affected. Either there were enough women that you know someone, or what I think is more likely to happen is that I'm going to show you how the campaign was implemented, and these were basically traveling clinics, right? So chances are that you saw this traveling clinic and you saw that it was in your surrounding. And the second thing is that the effect, everything suggests that goes through mouth to mouth, and that's why so the robustness check that we're trying to run here is to see if the effect decays with distance, but we haven't finished putting together the data set, and that should answer your question more precisely. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about the policy that we're going to be discussing. So this program was called the Programa Nacional de Salud Reproductiva y Planificación Familiar. It was part of a big package of anti-poverty measures launched by the government. So the government at a time had a strong focus on poverty reduction, and they saw that a key component of the poverty reduction effort, it was to drastically reduce fertility rates, especially in most isolated areas of the country, more rural, lower education, et cetera, right? So if you plot the inequalities along urban, rural, education, whatever, you would see massive inequalities, and the ratio in the fertility rate was between like 2.5 in high education households to almost 7 in very low education households, right? So the program entailed the free distribution of information and contraceptive methods throughout the network of health facilities of the country, and importantly, so the one of the contraceptive methods that was made available as part of this policy were male and female sterilization. So before 1996, male and female sterilizations were not included in the contraceptive methods package provided by the government, right? And actually, from the evidence that we've been able to gather, there was a strong emphasis on, there was a strong belief that sterilization was one of the most cost-effective methods to reduce fertility, right? And there's a couple of pieces of evidence that support this claim. First, they established extremely demanding targets on the number of women that had to be sterilized in each district in each period of the year. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. Second, they passed a law, the government passed a law that prohibited health professionals to object to treatment, right? This is, for example, when a very religious doctor does not want to perform an abortion, they can object to treatment, right? In this case, the objection to treatment was completely removed among the things that health professionals had to do, right? So these two things implied that the government was pushing really hard on this dimension, on this specific dimension of the overall package of family planning measures that they were introduced, right? So overall, during the period between 1996 and 2000, between 260,000 and 330,000 women were sterilized, and about 10,000 men were sterilized as well, right? So the numbers are not trivial if you take into account that the whole population of Peru right now in 2010 was around 33 million, right? So this is like, just to put the numbers in perspective, not a trivial number of. All right, so how did the program? Yep.
Quick question about the sterilization targets that you just mentioned. So just a little bit more information on them, and in particular, what I'm worried about is, a certain degree of class discrimination in Latin American countries where these targets would have been driven by socioeconomic factors with higher targets.
Yeah, no, so in a paper, we run sort of a prediction analysis. Basically, we run a lasso. We throw all the data that we have to try to predict where the program was going. And the variables that come out significant are those that you would expect for a family planning campaign, right? So places were more rural, less educated, higher fertility rates, lower female labor force participation. I'm going to show you in a little bit what are the characteristics of women directly affected by this, and it goes exactly in the direction that you're thinking about, no? More Quechua speaking, low education, rural women. I'm never going to know for sure who was illegally sterilized, because that information does not exist. Okay, we have the claims, and we're going to do a lot to try to claim that that is reliable data. But let's bring back this point in a few slides when I start showing the results. All right, so how was the campaign implemented? It was implemented mainly through what they called health festivals, right? So basically, people from the clinic started going around rural towns and saying, hey guys, so this weekend we're going to hold a health festival in this town. You should come down, you'll receive information, you'll receive free contraceptive methods and whatnot, right? So this is the picture of one of these health festivals where they set up camp at a school in Ayacucho, and for the weekend, and they offer tubal ligations and vasectomies for right. So clearly, as you can see in this picture, this is far from being a medical facility where one can treat complications after an intervention, right? So the tubal ligations and vasectomies is not per se a high risk intervention, but due to the scale of the program, there were cases where women had complications, and some of them unfortunately died. Okay, so there's many accounts of intimidation, insufficient information, threats, bribes, etc., right? So, and this is related to the high quotas established by the government. And if you read the accounts from the time, they're just heartbreaking. Right? So women saying, "Hey, I didn't know that. No one informed me that the procedure was not reversible." Women that were trying to have kids years later, unsuccessfully, they go to the doctor, and the doctor informs them, "Hey, how do you want to have kids if you're sterilized?" and so on, right? So a bunch of accounts of severe medical malpractices, right? And this follows the very high and ambitious policy targets that the government had established, right? And actually, these targets were established at the highest level. So I'm showing you here one letter from the Minister of Health at a time, who had to report directly to the president on how were they going in meeting the targets and whether they were going to meet the targets. So there are a few of these letters that are available, but we don't have the full span of the targets, right? So here the minister is telling the president, "Hey, Mr. President, we're working hard on it, and chances are that we're going to meet the target for the end of the year," right? Okay, so what was the information environment at that time? So as I told you, this policy was implemented during the government of an authoritarian regime. It's been well documented that the government had large influence in different parts of the judiciary. They controlled the judiciary. They controlled large part of the parliament. There were, and importantly, they had huge influence on the media. Okay, so there are videos of the intelligence chief giving the owners of each of the main TV channels and newspapers just boxes of cash, right? And actually, what brought down the government was one small cable channel that was not paid off. Okay, so in 1996, 1997, there were a few early complaints about these cases that involved some medical irregularities, but they were quickly dismissed by the allies of the government, either in parliament or in the media. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of data on this in a couple of slides. November 2000, Fujimori flees the country after huge corruption scandals. 2001, new government comes in, and this actually was one of the cases that was one of the first high-profile cases so far. So much so that the Ministry of Health launched, like, the new government took power in late July 2001. By September, the new Minister of Health was starting an investigation on this case, and this led to a constitutional indictment to Fujimori and his health ministers, which is still put on trial. Right. So this is just to bolster the idea that the information environment was pretty much controlled by the regime. Here I'm showing you the count of all the articles in Factiva that I could find in international media that mention forced sterilization in Peru. Unfortunately, there is no local systematic database where I can search for this. But what you see is that this is just like noise, right? But in 2000, some cases started appearing, and after the regime falls in late 2000, early 2001, you see the mentions of the forced sterilizations case peaking, right? And you see that this is sustained, and it peaks every few years, mostly around election time when Fujimori's daughter is running for office. Any questions? Okay, cool. So what's the data that we're going to be using? Our main independent, so this is a paper that I've been wanting, this is a topic that I've been wanting to investigate for a long time. And actually, I remember talking to Andreas ages ago. And one of the main constraints that I had was that I couldn't find a decent measure of the incidence of this alleged human rights violation until after searching and asking around for a while, I found this registry of victims called REVIESFO. So it has a total victims registered, and it includes the location and the time of the events. Overall, 6,800 women have registered here. This is a data set created by the Ministry of Justice. And given that this is going to be my main independent variable, I'm going to go back and discuss it at length in the next couple of slides. My left, yeah, Valeria. Yes, Valeria.
Sorry, my microphone was in the wrong direction. So quick question, just because the picture you showed also talked about vasectomies. So in the registry, you only have women?
In the registry, I only have women, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's, to my knowledge, there's no accounts of forced or misled vasectomies. But the order of magnitude is just completely different, no?
So in terms of the number of procedures that were carried out, the order of magnitude is very different, you mean?
Yeah, so the estimated number of vasectomies is around 10,000, whereas female sterilizations is around 200,000.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so where am I going to get my left-hand side variables? I'm going to collect all the DHSs from 1991 until 2017, right? So remember here the disclosure of the information happens when the regime falls in 2001. So I'm going to have a few pre-periods until 2004. The survey is conducted every 4 years. Starting in 2004, I have yearly data, and here I'm going to measure child health, contraceptive usage, prenatal health, prenatal care, birth attendance, and use of health facilities. Okay, I'm going to collect also electoral data and data on transit institutions from the Latino Barometer. All right, now the registry of victims. What is this fantastic data set that allowed me to start studying this topic? This was set up by the Ministry of Justice in 2015, and it aimed at identifying victims of these illegal sterilizations, right? So basically, the Ministry of Justice set up this office, which went out to the places where these alleged violations, they suspected that the alleged violations of human rights had happened, and they proactively went and informed women that there was a possibility that they could sign up to this registry. And what they promised them was basically support in things that were related to the illegal sterilization, namely free legal advice, access to healthcare services and psychological support, and so on. But no financial compensation was promised. Although when I spoken to people in this office, they told me that yes, some women expected to have some financial compensation at some point in the future. However, it was not as easy as writing down your name in a piece of paper, right? So when you signed up for this, you had to go through a lot of scrutiny to provide as many proofs as possible that you were a victim of the sterilization. First, you have to go through a medical exam and prove that you were indeed sterilized. This is a non-reversible procedure, and a signed statement saying that it occurred during the campaign, and whenever possible, they cross the data with the health administration data from the time to try to see if you were sterilized during the time of the campaign. Okay, so it's not 100% sure that this woman were illegally sterilized, but they go through a procedure that has a non-trivial cost to sign up to the registry. Okay, so let me now give you a little bit of comparative statistics about the data set. Overall, there are 6,800 reports by the time that we collected the data. This covers women in 20% of the districts in the country. And here you see that the incidence is highest where like women have lower education, no? The Southern Andes, the Amazon, and so on, right? And this is also the places where there's more incidence of people speaking native languages, etc., etc. All right. So here what I'm taking is data. This is kind of a sanity check, right? I'm taking data from the DHS where they asked women if they had been sterilized and in which year they had been sterilized, and we see that indeed in the early 90s, very few sterilizations, and when the campaign starts, it quickly jumps, right? 95, 96, 97, huge number of sterilizations. Here I'm just plotting the counts from the DHS, but it's the same if you put it as a percentage of the population. Then it goes down. 2001, it just stabilizes. All right, and if we put together the time series from the sterilization counts in the DHS and in the registry, you see that they match, right? So here what I want to show you is that the registry is not just noise, right? It reproduces quite well the time profile of the sterilizations that took place. And here I'm restricting the DHS to sterilizations that took place in a public health facility, right? So time profile matches quite nice. If I put together both the time and the geographical dimensions and I try to match them, controlling for district time fixed effects and district time trends, which are the controls that I'm going to include in my main specification, what I get is that the correlation between the registry and the cases reported in the DHS is quite high, right? The correlation is about 0.625, which is significant at the 1%, right? So it's not only the time series that makes sense, but also the time series plus the cross section of our data makes sense. So this table goes to Valeria's previous point. Who are the women who sign up in this registry, right? So in columns 1 to 3, we have the few characteristics that we have on the women who sign up in the registry, and in columns 4 to 6, we have the characteristics of women who report having been sterilized in a public health facility in between 96 and 2000, right? I just want to establish that these are similar observations and that I'm not capturing noise in my data, right? So these are women who had already 4 children by the time they were sterilized. They were 31 years old, so that's roughly like approaching the late part of their fertility. They're mostly rural or belonging to an agricultural community. The one part where we see sharp differences between the DHS and the registry is in the percentage of Quechua speakers, right? So Quechua is a native language. In the registry, we have 48% of Quechua speaking women. In the DHS, this is 10%. I honestly have no idea where this difference is coming from, but we know that the answer to this question really depends on how it is asked. No, some people, well, I know how the question is asked in the DHS. They ask you, what language do you speak at home frequently? I have no idea how they asked it in REVIESFO, right? It massively depends on, do you like speak it with your mom? Did your mom pass it to you, and what? Okay, so high correlation in the time series between DHS and REVIESFO, high correlation in the cross section, and the characteristics of the woman kind of match each other, right? So the REVIESFO is not capturing only news. Right, so before going into the empirical strategy and the results, let me pause to see if there are some questions.
Actually, Christine put something in the chat. Maybe Christine, you want to mute yourself? I think.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt for that, but I was just saying in some DHSs they ask about sterilization regret and also about informed consent. So I was wondering whether this was the case in these DHS, and if so, then maybe you could see whether it correlates at the regional level as well with the figures.
Yeah, I remember looking at that question, but for some reason we discarded it. But I should have an answer for that. So it is definitely available in the Peruvian DHS, at least for a couple of years. But I should know the answer to that question. Thank you, Christine. All right, so empirical specification, left-hand side are going to be outcomes for individual I in District J, surveyed in year T. We're going to have district fixed effects, survey year fixed effects, district-specific linear trends, a bunch of X's that are related to the outcome variables we're measuring to, we are interested on. And our interest is going to be in the interaction between the post, which is going to take the value of 1 in the survey years after 2001, namely after the information was revealed, and FS, which is going to be a measure of the presence of alleged victims of human rights violations during the campaign. And this is going to be the inverse hyperbolic sign of the total number of women, or a dummy variable for ease of interpretation. Okay, so we use the IHS transformation because we have a bunch of zeros. All right, and my errors are going to be clustered at the district level. All right, so outcome variables, we're going to have a dummy for whether you use any contraceptive method. So we're going to focus on outcomes related to stuff that is relatively close to the spirit of the campaign, right? Contraceptive usage, whether you receive any prenatal care, whether you gave birth at home, whether you had birth assistance. And then we're going to look at child health, and if the child, if you took the child to the doctor when she was sick, right? So on the first, on 2 and 3, I'm going to aggregate these into indices, but we have in the paper all the variables. Okay, so let me just start showing you some results after talking for 35 minutes. All right, so here, this is a structure of all the tables that I'm going to show you. In panel A is our preferred specification, where we have the IHS of the number of forced sterilizations reported. At the bottom, we have a dummy. Okay, so having 10% more women sterilized in your district leads to about a 4.4 reduction in the probability that you use any contraceptive methods. It reduces the likelihood, it reduces the usage of prenatal care or delivery services in about 0.05 of a standard deviation, and the child health is reduced in about 4.9%. Okay, so 10% increase in the number of victims. I would say these are not massive effects, but at the same time, I would not expect this type of treatment to generate massive effects, right? So if you put it in perspective, for example, a 10% increase in the number of sterilization leads to a 4.4% reduction in the usage of contraceptive services. This is over a base of 66%, right? So 7-8% effect. All right, what happens if we look at the usage of public health services, right? So in column 1, I'm showing you the effect on the probability of whether you took your child to a health facility when they reported being sick. This goes down. Let's look at the dummies just for ease of interpretation. This goes down by 3 percentage points. if we break this down by whether you took the child to a public or a private health facility, we see a drop of 6 percentage points in the probability of taking kids to a public healthcare facility, and on the other hand, an increase in the usage of private health facilities, right? So if you think that the proportion of the population using public health facilities is around 75 to 80%, there's no way this increase in private health facilities compensates, right? So overall, there is a massive decrease in the usage of public health services. So of course, you're wondering about pre-trends. I'm showing you here the pre-trends for our main outcomes. Basically, you see everything is flat until 2000, and then you start seeing a drop in the outcomes that is sustained all the way to our last data set that is 17, right? We could actually include a couple of more years, right? And you see these for contraceptive use, for the prenatal care and delivery index, as well as the child health index, right? So basically flat, and then a drop that is sustained. Okay, so I spent a lot of time talking about the comparison between the DHS and the registry. This was not only to show you that the data was not crazy, but to some extent, some reports say that at least 40 or 50% of the sterilizations that took place during the campaign had been misled, and I only have 6,800 people in my registry. Right? So there's clearly noise in my data. So to alleviate a little bit the concern about attenuation bias and whatnot, what I'm doing in this table is using the DHS to instrument the registry and kind of separate the noise from the signal, right? So for ease of interpretation, I'm showing you in column 1 our main results, the ones that I showed you before. In column 2, I'm using as the independent variable the count of cases in a certain district from the DHS, and in column 3, it is the IV result. Right? What you see is that when you compare column 1 and column 3, the coefficients always go up and they retain statistical significance, except for the case of the last outcome. And this is consistent with like attenuation bias, right? Attenuation bias always throws your coefficients towards you. All right, so robustness checks, is it a direct effect of the campaign? No. When we run a heterogeneity of our effects between different cohorts that were old enough to have been directly affected by the campaign and those that were less than 14 years old, we see no heterogeneity at all, right? Is it because of other time varying covariates? It doesn't seem to be the case, right? This is robust inclusion of baseline controls and interactions with the tree. All right. So what explains? So before I go into mechanisms, are there any questions? I've been talking very fast. Sorry.
I think no questions for now, but let me take a chance to tell you that you still have 15 minutes left.
Yeah, perfect. I have 2 more tables only. Okay, so what can potentially explain the reduction in health usage and the reduction in health outcomes, right? So taking going back to the literature that I mentioned before, there are a few papers that kind of guides us in exploring what are the potential mechanisms, right? So one is social learning through identification. In this paper, Marcela Alsan and her co-author studied the case of the Tuskegee experiment. Basically, an experiment in the U.S. in a town in the U.S. South where syphilis treatment, even though it existed, was withheld from a group of Black men in order to study the effectiveness of these treatments, right? Later, the results of this experiment were revealed. People learned that Black men basically were experimented on, and what they see is that there is lower health usage of health services by Black men in towns close to Tuskegee, right? And the underlying theory here is that I learned that the government mistreated someone like me, therefore I stopped trusting the government, right? In the case of Andreas and Monica's paper, they look at the case of Pakistan, where the CIA used a team of vaccinators to try to identify where Osama bin Laden was, and after they killed Osama bin Laden and whatnot, the Taliban disclosed this information to the population, and what they observed is that there is a reduction in the demand for vaccines among people who are more likely to identify with the Taliban, right? So more Muslim areas where the Taliban had higher support. So the mechanism here is political identification, right? So someone I trust on politically tells me something, and I align with, right? An alternative mechanism that we are going to explore as well here is the disappointed, the one that claims that there are disappointed political supporters, right? And the idea here is that I support the government, I like the government, I later learned that they mistreated parts of the population, and then I withdraw the support not only to the government, but also start trusting less institutions, right? So what we're going to be doing here is kind of a horse race between these three explanations. And if you have any other ideas, please throw them on the table, and I'll be happy to report back to you when I go to the data. All right, so first thing that I'm going to show you, these are the heterogeneity of the effects by whether your district was, yes, the heterogeneity of the effect by whether your district was above the median of support for the party in the government at the time at base. What, right? So what we see is that the entirety of the effect is coming from places that had high support for Fujimori's party at base, right? So for the other ones, even if you had cases of forced sterilizations, we see a relatively precise zero effect. All right, so this is in line with the idea that it could be disappointed voters, the ones that are driving the results, right? And to explore and consistent with what you would expect from this explanation is that they start withdrawing their support for the party, right? And this is exactly what I'm showing you in this table. In places where you had a high number of reports after 2001, the vote share of Fujimori's party goes down significantly. The party rank goes up, right? So the higher ranks is bad, right? So the first is a winner, right? But the effect is not strong enough to affect the probability that the party wins, right? So this learning about this lowers the political support for Fujimori's, right? So now let's go on and try to test directly the three hypotheses that we've put together. So in this table, what I'm showing you is kind of a horse race between these three ideas. Yes, Leandro, sorry.
Sorry, my question is, so it's a sense of one, like it seems to be like an intensive margin and a demand, these people don't want this treatment anymore. And did you explore the sort of extensive supply side? If these were Fujimori, they were probably getting more health clinics, especially these traveling health clinics. And maybe after they get less health clinics or they don't get health clinics open, I wonder if there's like a supply, and then it become an extensive margin as well. Maybe there's like a
yeah. So what we have is the expenditures in health in the district, and we recently got that data. So I've got to run the heterogeneity. And so in the next table, one other heterogeneity that I should add is this, no? Because there may be a backlash also from the supply side. That's your story, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is good. Okay, so here the three potential explanations that I mentioned before are very much correlated with each other, right? So we earlier saw that the women affected by the policy were poor, Quechua-speaking, non-educated. This correlates very much with the support for Fujimori. So Fujimori basically led the state to be present in places where it had never been before, right? So these are exactly the rural, low education communities, and so on, right? So what we do here is basically throw everything at the same time to see what survives, right? So the social learning through identification theory would predict that the effect would be stronger among Quechua-speaking, low education rural women, right? So this is a Quechua speaker rural education, right? We also throw in signal strength, and this is what I was telling Christine before. The signal strength is basically how far can the signal travel. This is based on Stefano de la Viña's paper that has later been used by Ruben, Maria, etc. So, well, basically I throw in here everything I have here and heterogeneity that you saw before by support to Fujimori, right? What do we see? We see relatively precise zeros all over the place, and the one interaction that survives with a non-trivial magnitude and decent statistical significance is the support for Fujimori, right? So this is much more consistent with the idea that there are disappointed voters, right? So finally, trust in institutions, right? We see, so here I'm taking the Latino barometer and running regressions on mistrust for the government, right? So higher values. Sorry, here I code. I really the two highest categories are coded as 1. If you trust the government, it's coded as a 0, right? What do we see? We see much stronger effects. Actually, we see that we only have effects in those institutions that were somehow involved in the execution of the program, right? The government, public administration, the judiciary, and so on, right? And importantly, these are institutions that survive governments, right? We don't see any effects on trust for the president, for the Congress, political parties. And in the paper, we have all the questions that appear in the Latino barometer, and we see precise zeros in the media, the army, and what, right? So I think that this reveals kind of an important point, and just to wrap up, what we see is that the way policies are implemented have deep implications for the levels of trust citizens have on the government, and this in turn affects the demand. So low trust hampers the demand for public health services, affecting health outcomes, right? And these results, I think, helps us think more deeply about how policies are designed, how they are executed, and importantly, how they are communicated to the population. Okay, so I'll just leave it there. I went 3 minutes over. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Gianmarco. Excellent and super interesting. I guess I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. If people have questions, please just raise your hand. I guess we can already turn off the recording to increase participation.